Hello, and welcome back to Haunted Drift Horror. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy drifting into haunted realms filled with pure horror, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable, dim the lights if you dare, relax your mind, let the outside world fade away, and let's begin. Story 1. I moved into my first apartment about 3 weeks ago on a Monday. It was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life. At least, that is what I kept telling myself while I carried boxes up from my car, signed the last few papers, and stood in the middle of the empty living room, listening to the soft echo of my own footsteps. It was my first place that was really mine, not a room in someone else's house. Not a shared place with friends. Not a college apartment where the walls smelled like old pizza and cheap beer. Mine, the building, was fairly new, and the location was good. It sat downtown, close enough to coffee shops, little restaurants, and my office that I could walk most places if the weather was nice. The rent was reasonable, too, which felt like a miracle. I had expected to hate something about it right away, but at first, I did not. The apartment had big windows, clean floors, and a kitchen that looked like no one had ever really cooked in it before. It was small, sure, but it felt bright and fresh. The only part that disappointed me was the bathroom. It was clean, which mattered more than anything, but it was cramped. There was barely enough space for a sink, a toilet, and a shower stall. The shower was narrow enough that if I turned too quickly, my elbow hit the wall. There was no tub, no counter space, nothing fancy. Just a basic shower with a little metal grate drain in the floor. The drain was one of those simple round grates with thin slats across it. If you looked down through it, you could see straight into the pipe below. That detail bothered me a little, though I could not have explained why. It was just plumbing. Every shower had a drain. Every drain led somewhere. But seeing into the dark pipe beneath it made me uncomfortable in a way I brushed off as silly. The first night I stayed there, everything seemed normal. I was exhausted from moving, so I took a shower before bed. My hair is long and dark, and it takes a while to wash properly. The strands are thick and coarse, the kind that stick to everything when they come loose. I have always had to collect the shed hair when I wash it, because otherwise it clogs the plumbing. I am used to it. It is just one of those small, annoying parts of having long hair. That night, while I rinsed shampoo and conditioner from my hair, the grate caught the loose strands before they could wash down into the pipe. A dark little clump formed over the drain, moving slightly as water ran around it. I was too tired to deal with it right away. I figured I would let it dry overnight and pick it up in the morning. Dry hair was easier to throw away than wet hair, and I was already half asleep. So I left it there, got dressed, and went to bed. In the morning, the hair was gone. At first, I just stood in the bathroom doorway and stared at the drain. I knew I had left it there. I remembered seeing it clearly. It had been sitting on top of the grate. A loose, wet tangle of dark strands. But now, the drain was clean. Not perfectly polished or anything, just empty. There was no clump, no loose hair stuck to the metal, no sign that anything had been there at all. It was strange, but it was such a small thing that I let myself ignore it. Maybe the water had softened it enough that it slipped through later. Maybe I had cleaned it up and forgotten. Maybe I had dreamed leaving it there because I had been so tired. That day, I used a shower cap and did not notice anything else. A day or two later, I washed my hair again. This time, I paid more attention. I watched the strands gather across the grate as I rinsed the conditioner from my hair. When I shut the water off, the clump was still there, dark and slick, resting over the slats. I stepped out onto my bath mat and wrapped a towel around myself, deciding I would scoop it up while it was still wet and rinse my fingers afterward. I reached down. Before my fingers even closed around the hair, it began to slip through the grate, not all at once, strand by strand. It moved like the water was still running, even though the shower was off. I watched the dark strands slide between my fingers and disappear into the pipe below. I tried to grab them, but they slipped away too smoothly, like something under the grate was gently pulling them down. I froze there, crouched over the drain with one hand still reaching toward it. Then I stood up quickly and told myself I was being ridiculous. I had just moved. I was tired. I was stressed. My whole routine had changed. I was sleeping badly, eating badly, and living out of boxes. People see strange things when they are exhausted. People misread normal things. That was what I told myself. I decided I would only worry if it happened again. The drain acted normal the next day. Nothing strange moved, nothing disappeared while I watched. So I pushed the whole thing to the back of my mind and tried to forget about it. Friday morning was when I noticed something new. It was so small that I almost missed it. I was brushing my teeth when my eyes drifted to the shower drain. The pipe beneath the grate looked longer than it should have. Until then, it had been short enough that I could see where it curved and disappeared into the plumbing. That morning, the dark space under the grate seemed deeper. The curve looked farther away, like the pipe had stretched overnight. I stared at it for a few seconds, toothbrush hanging from my mouth. Then I shook my head. Who really paid that much attention to a drain? I was probably remembering it wrong. I did not wash my hair that night. On Saturday morning, when I checked again, the pipe looked normal. The curve was back where I expected it to be. But something dark was resting at the bottom, just before the bend. I leaned closer. It was hair, a clump of my hair. A lot of it. Much more than I would have lost in a few showers. It looked like weeks of buildup, maybe even a month's worth. A thick, dark knot sat at the bottom of the pipe, half caught near the curve, wet and heavy-looking. I stood up and backed away. Maybe it was from a previous tenant, I told myself. Maybe the drain had been partly clogged before I moved in. Maybe the first few showers had loosened something from deeper in the plumbing. But that did not make much sense. I could not see any other pipes connecting to mine beneath the grate. And the hair looked like mine. Long, dark, coarse. I looked away and turned the shower on. While I washed my hair, I tried not to look down. But of course I did. I kept glancing between my feet at the grate. The clump I had seen before was gone. The space near the curve was empty now. Then, two loose strands from my head slid down my leg and circled the drain. I watched them coil into the pipe below, slipping through the grate and past the empty space where the larger clump had been. After I got out and dried myself, I sat on the closed toilet lid and stared at the drain for a long time. I watched leftover water drip down through the grate. Tiny droplets clung to the metal, sliding slowly until they lost their weight and stopped moving. A fresh cluster of my hair sat over the drain like a damp film. I reached for it again, but more carefully this time. I moved slowly, like I was hunting something small and easily startled. Something below the grate began to pull. The hair started sliding down through the slats. This time, I did not imagine it. It moved at the exact same pace as my hand. Slow, careful, deliberate. It was almost like whatever was beneath the grate was playing along with me. It waited until I was close, then drew the strands away, one by one, until the last dark hair slipped into the pipe. I stood up. Then I got dressed. After that, checking the drain in the morning became a little ritual. I did not mean for it to. It just happened. Every day, before coffee, before brushing my teeth, before getting ready for work, I would step into the bathroom and look down through the grate. The next few days blur together now. Sometimes the pipe looked normal, sometimes it looked longer. Sometimes the bend beneath the drain was visible, and sometimes it seemed too far down to see clearly. I began to feel like the bathroom itself had moods. Some mornings it felt plain and ordinary. Other mornings the shower stall felt like it was waiting for me to notice something. By Wednesday, I came home from work and found another large clump of hair. This time, it was sitting on top of the grate. It looked like mine again, but there was too much of it. A wet, dark tangle rested there as if someone had left it for me. I stood in the doorway and stared at it. For a moment, I did not want to touch it. I had the strange thought that maybe it was not meant for me. Maybe I was supposed to leave it there. Maybe the drain would take it back down when it was ready. But then, curiosity won. I crouched and picked it up. It was definitely mine. At least, most of it was. It was damp and almost slimy, but when I rolled the strands between my fingers, I could feel the familiar, coarse texture. I held the clump in one hand and used the other to pick through it. I did not know what I expected to find. A bug, maybe, a piece of metal. Something that would explain why the hair kept appearing and disappearing. There was nothing. So I tossed it in the trash. A strange disappointment settled in me as I stood up. That was the first time I realized I had started enjoying it. Not exactly enjoying, maybe, but expecting something. The drain had become a little mystery. A private game. A thing only I knew about. I glanced back down and noticed that the pipe was too long for me to see the bottom. I turned on my phone flashlight and aimed it through the grate. The beam stretched down into the pipe, but it barely reached what might have been the bend. I could not be sure. The darkness seemed to swallow the light before it touched anything solid. Still, I showered anyway. This time, I did not try to stop any fallen strands. I let them swirl around my feet and slip through the grate. I watched them go without touching them. By the weekend, the clumps had become common enough that I no longer reacted the way I should have. I had learned the rules, or at least I thought I had. Whatever was left on top of the drain was mine to take. That seemed fair. If the hair appeared there, I could pick through it, examine it, and throw it away. But if the drain began to take it, I was supposed to let it go. That was the shape of the game. The clumps were not there every time I checked. They were not even there every day. But they appeared often enough that I started expecting them. Some mornings, I woke up with a weird little pull in my chest, wondering what the drain had left for me. On Friday morning, I found a clump and picked through it with more care than usual. Most of the hair looked like mine, but there were a few blonde strands twisted through it. They were longer than my hair, lighter, thinner. They did not belong to me. I should have been frightened by that. Instead, I stared at them for a long time. Around lunchtime on Sunday, I found another one. Nothing unusual that time. Just the familiar dark tangle, damp and heavy, waiting on the grate. Washing my hair had always felt like a chore before. My hair is thick and long, with a curl pattern that never behaves the same way twice. If I let it dry naturally, it takes forever, and it frizzes unless I use the right products in the right order. A full wash routine can take 45 minutes. If I blow it out, it can take an hour and a half. I do not straighten it much because it feels like too much work and too much heat. Before the drain, I dreaded hair washing days. After the drain, I started looking forward to them. I know that sounds strange. I know it should have been the point where I called a plumber or asked the building manager to send maintenance. But I did not. Instead, I started treating it like something exciting. My heart would jump whenever I saw the tangled mess over the drain begin to sink. I would hover my hand over it, fingers just barely touching the strands, waiting to see if it would pull away from me. On Monday, after we played, I worked up the courage to look straight down into the pipe. I had avoided looking after our little games. Some part of me worried that one day I would see something staring back. An eye, a mouth, fingers I did not know. But that day, I looked. It was empty. I was certain of that. There was no hair clump sitting at the bend, no movement, no flash of skin or teeth or anything alive. But the pipe was longer than it had ever been. The curve was so far down that my phone flashlight could not reach it anymore. The beam vanished into the dark long before it found the bottom. I stood there for a while, breathing through my nose, trying to tell myself there had to be some normal explanation for that. Pipes do not grow. Plumbing does not stretch. Darkness can trick your eyes. I did not have much time to think about it, though. I had work in an hour, and if I did not leave soon, traffic would trap me downtown. Tuesday night was different. I found a clump on the grate and crouched down to pick through it. I was almost calm by then. My fingers moved through the damp hair carefully, separating strands, feeling for anything unusual. That was when something solid touched my fingertip. It glinted faintly in the bathroom light. I pulled it free. It was an earring, a small silver hoop. The kind you might wear to sleep when your ear piercing is still fresh and you do not want the hole to close. It was slick with water and wrapped in several dark strands of hair. It was not mine. At least, I do not think it was. I set it on the edge of the sink and stared at it for a long time. I tried to remember if I had ever owned earrings like that. Maybe years ago. Maybe someone had left one in the apartment before I moved in. Maybe it had been caught in the drain for months. But it had not looked old. It had looked newly lost. I washed my hair on Wednesday morning. I had been avoiding looking down the pipe since Monday. The length it had reached was starting to unsettle me. I still wanted the game, but I no longer wanted to think too hard about where the drain led. When I stepped into the shower that morning, I caught the drain out of the corner of my eye. The curve was visible again. It looked normal, exactly how it should have looked. Relief hit me so quickly that I almost laughed. While I rinsed shampoo from my hair, the drain began to look dark and heavy again. I told myself it was just shadow. Steam moved around my feet. Water ran over the metal grate. Loose strands circled and stuck there. After I stepped out and started drying myself, the pipe looked almost normal, though the bend was just slightly out of view from where I stood. I went through the rest of my routine, getting dressed for work, brushing my teeth, packing my bag. I saved the drain for last, like a reward. When I crouched down and inched my fingers toward the hair, nothing happened. That was okay, I thought. Sometimes it takes a minute. I played with the strands, brushing the tips with my fingers. Still nothing. The clump sat there, flat and dead over the grate. I waited longer than I want to admit. Then I stood up, disappointed in a way that made me feel embarrassed. Maybe I would try again after work. When I came home that evening, the hair was still there. It had dried slightly into a thin brown film over the metal. I picked it up with no resistance at all. I frowned. Then I threw it away. The pipe did not shift while I showered that night. The drain did not pull at any strands. Nothing moved. Nothing played back. Today, I found another clump. One of the almost mine ones. That is the best way I can describe it. Most of it looked like my hair, but not completely. It was the right color and close to the right texture, but some of the strands were too thin, some were too long, some had a reddish tint under the bathroom light. It is strange to admit, but after Wednesday, I felt almost hurt. The drain had stopped responding to me, and I did not know why. I did not pick up the clump right away. I did not have to go into the office because Thursdays are my remote days, so I had no rush. I left it there and went out in the morning to run a few errands. When I came back, the hair was gone. I spent the rest of the day frustrated at my desk, pretending to work, while my mind kept going back to the bathroom. The drain had followed rules before. I knew it had. There had been a rhythm to it, a pattern. It took what I gave it. It left things sometimes. It played when it wanted to. But now it felt like the rules had changed, and I did not understand why. Around 9 or 10 that night, I broke. I got a screwdriver from a drawer and one of those cheap wire hangers from the dry cleaner. I went into the bathroom, shut the door, and crouched in the shower stall. The grate was easy to remove. Just 2 screws, both loose enough that they barely fought me. I lifted the metal cover and set it aside on the shower floor. The open pipe stared up at me. Without the grate, it looked much worse. Wider, darker, more like a throat than a drain. I bent the wire hanger into a hook. I did not care how short the pipe looked now. I was not putting my fingers down there. The hanger worked on the first try. I lowered it into the drain, twisted it slightly, and felt it catch. When I pulled up, a slimy tangle of hair came with it. It slid free without resistance and landed on the shower floor with a wet slap. I set it aside and reached in again. More hair came up. Then more. Then more. There was so much of it. Some was clearly mine. Long, dark, coarse. Some belonged to someone else. Blonde strands. Brown strands. Fine gray hairs. Red strands so bright they looked almost copper under the bathroom light. But as the pile grew, it became impossible to tell where one person's hair ended and another began. Everything was knotted together in a single matted mess. The hair spread across the shower floor. Wet clumps stuck to the tile. Strands clung to my fingers, my wrists, the wire hanger. Every time I thought I had reached the end, the hook caught another knot deeper in the pipe. There was always more. I expected something to react. I expected the drain to pull back, to tug on the hanger, to swallow the hair before I could take it. I expected the pipe to lengthen or shift or make some sound. But there was nothing. No resistance. No movement. No game. Just hair. I kept pulling. After a while, I started noticing something inside the tangles. Not an object. Not exactly a shape. Nothing I can describe properly. It was more like a feeling that came from looking at the hair too long. The pile was not random. That thought came to me slowly, and once it did, I could not shake it. The hair seemed arranged somehow, organized, not braided, not woven, not tied in any way I understood, but still placed with purpose. Certain strands looped through others. Some knots sat too neatly beside different colored clusters. The more I pulled out, the more the mass on the shower floor looked like it was supposed to fit together, like it was forming something. I stared at it, trying to understand. For a moment, I almost did. There was a pattern there. I could feel it just out of reach in my mind. If I looked at one section from the corner of my eye, I almost recognized how it connected to the rest. If I followed the red strands to the blonde ones, then down into the dark coils that looked like mine, I almost understood what the shape was meant to be. Then the thought slipped away. I tried again and lost it again. Over and over, I almost saw it, almost understood it, almost recognized the thing the hair was trying to make. My head started to ache. The bathroom felt too warm. The air smelled like wet hair, old pipes, and something faintly sour. My knees hurt from crouching in the shower, but I kept working the hanger down into the drain and pulling up more. At some point, I realized I did not know if I was still pulling the hair out or putting it back in. That sounds impossible, but it was true. My hands were moving. The hanger was moving. The pile was changing. but I could no longer tell which direction anything was going. The hair on the floor seemed to shift when I looked away. The clumps near the drain seemed thicker, then thinner, then thicker again. Strands that had been on my left were suddenly near my right hand. A knot I was sure I had pulled out was half inside the pipe again. I stopped. I sat there in the shower stall with the open drain in front of me, the grate beside my knee, and a pile of wet hair spread around me, like something that had crawled out of a body. The pipe below was dark, too dark. I do not know what is down there. I do not know where all the hair came from. I do not know why the drain took mine, or why it started giving some back. I do not know who the blonde hair belonged to. I do not know whose earring I found. I do not know why it stopped playing with me. But I think I made a mistake taking the grate off. Because now, as I sit here writing this, the bathroom door is open, and I can hear something from the shower. It is not water. It is not dripping. It is a soft, slow sliding sound, like hair being pulled across tile. I should put the grate back on. I should call maintenance. I should leave the apartment and never come back. But part of me still wants to know what shape it was trying to make. Part of me wants to go back in there, lower the hanger down again, and keep pulling until I finally understand. I am not sure I should keep going. Story 2. My most precious thing has always been my bedside radio. I know that might sound strange, especially now, when everyone has a phone that can play any song in the world, any podcast, any video, any voice, any sound, at any time. But that old radio meant more to me than any of that. It was never just a radio to me. It was a nightlight without light. It was a guard dog that never barked. It was a voice in the room when I was too scared to be alone with the silence. I have had it since I was a kid. It is a small little thing, not fancy, but nice in its own way. It has an AM and FM receiver, a digital clock, and a CD player built into the top. The CD player has not worked since I was about 5 years old, when my brother knocked it off my dresser. He always said it was an accident, and my parents believed him because they were tired, and because believing him was easier than dealing with another fight. But I knew better. Even at 5, I knew the difference between someone brushing against something by mistake and someone hitting it hard enough to make sure it broke. The radio landed on the floor, the CD lid popped open, and after that, the CD player never worked again. The clock still worked. The radio still worked. That was enough. I remember the short time when the CD player did work. I would put in a disc at night and fall asleep to music. At first, it felt good. The songs made the room feel full. It was like someone was sitting beside my bed, keeping watch. The music covered the little house sounds that scared me. The clicks in the walls, the wind outside, the pipes, the settling floors, and all the noises that seemed louder when you were a child trying not to be afraid. But then the CD would end. The last song would fade out, and then the silence would come back, all at once. That silence was worse than the dark. It felt heavy, like a blanket pressed over my face. If something moved in the hallway after that, or if someone downstairs shouted, I would wake up frozen, too scared to breathe, feeling like the only person alive in the whole house. That was why I started listening to the radio instead. I did not care if I knew the voices or not. I did not care if the station was clear or full of static. I liked the feeling that something was still happening somewhere else. A host talking, a weather report, a late-night caller, a song coming in through a weak signal. Even if I fell asleep, the station would keep going without me. The voices would still be there in the morning, or at least that was what I liked to believe. Sometimes the hosts talked for a long time before they played anything I knew. But sooner or later, a familiar song would come on. and I would feel safe enough to close my eyes. It was nice to have that bit of steady comfort in a house where almost nothing felt steady. I did not have a great childhood, if that is not already clear. My brother knocking the radio off the dresser was not the worst thing he ever did. It was not even close. He was older than me, and from the time I was little, he filled the house with anger. The fighting usually started in the afternoon, after he came home from skipping school or smoking with his friends. Sometimes he would come in laughing too loud, smelling like cigarettes and cold air. Other times he would come in already angry, slamming the door so hard the windows shook. By evening, the shouting would start. By night, the shouting turned into something else. There were fights with my parents, fights with the walls, fights with whatever furniture was close enough to kick or throw. There were doors slammed so hard the frames cracked. There were holes punched into drywall and later covered with posters, calendars, or cheap-framed pictures. There were times when my mother cried in the kitchen and my father told everyone to calm down in a voice that was not calm at all. Sometimes the house went quiet after midnight, and sometimes it did not. Sometimes the quiet was worse because it felt like everyone was waiting for the next explosion. That was when my radio helped me the most. I would lie in bed with a blanket pulled up to my chin and turn the dial slowly until I found a station strong enough to cover the sounds downstairs. If the talking got too clear and I could still hear the fight under it, I moved the dial until I found music. If the music was too soft, I turned up the volume. If the station faded in and out, I stayed with the static, because even static was better than hearing a fist hit the wall. The sound did not stop what was happening in the house, but it put a layer between me and it. It made things seem farther away. It let me pretend, for a few hours, that I was somewhere else. I was thinking about all of that today while I stood in my bedroom and looked at the radio on my dresser. It was playing some indie song from one of the college stations, a song I did not know, but did not mind. Almost everything else in my room was packed in boxes: clothes, books, old notebooks, posters, chargers, shoes. All of it was sorted and taped up because I was leaving for college that night. After almost 15 years in the same room, I was finally getting out. The radio was one of the last things left unpacked. That felt right. It had sat in the same place for years. It had been moved only when the dresser was cleaned or when I needed to dust under it. It had never been unplugged for long. It had stayed there like it had a duty, like it knew its job was to stand guard while I slept. Through childhood, middle school, high school, bad nights, lonely nights, and nights when I thought I would never leave that house, it had stayed beside me and played softly in the dark. I guess it was not only defensive, though. It did not only protect me by covering noise. One night, it pushed me to do something. One night, it told me to fight back in the only way I could. That night was bad. Not normal bad. Not the usual shouting, slamming, and cursing that had become part of the background of my life. This was worse. There was more crying than usual, more sobbing, more sharp sounds from downstairs that did not sound like fists hitting walls anymore. They sounded like fists hitting something softer, something that could bruise, something that could bleed. I was in bed with my radio on, trying to disappear under the blanket. I remember the clock showing close to midnight, and I remember thinking that things should have been slowing down by then. Most nights, the worst of it burned itself out before then. Someone would storm out, or someone would lock themselves in a room, or everyone would get too tired to keep going. But that night, it kept rising. Round after round, shouting, crying, heavy footsteps, another crash, another scream, another voice begging someone to stop. I wanted to turn the radio louder and cry until I fell asleep. I wanted to pretend I was not there. That was what I usually did. Children in houses like that learn how to become small. They learn how to stay quiet. They learn that sometimes safety means not being noticed. I reached over and twisted the dial, trying to find more static, but I must have nudged it past the station I had been listening to. A song came on. I did not recognize it. It was already near the end, fading out in that soft way songs do before the DJ speaks. I waited for the next song or some late-night radio voice. Instead, a public service announcement began to play. It sounded like one of those ads that used to come on between reruns on TV. Calm voice. Serious tone. The kind that tells you to report something if you see something wrong. It did not describe anything specific. It did not say domestic violence. It did not say abuse. It did not say danger in your own home. But the message was clear enough. It kept saying help was only one phone call away. It said not to hesitate before it was too late. Then it gave a phone number. I lay there listening, my whole body tense. When the announcement ended, a song I knew started playing. Rabid Child by They Might Be Giants. I remember that because it surprised me. It was not the kind of thing I expected to hear on the radio in the middle of the night, especially not on a station I had found by accident. But there it was, strange and familiar at the same time. While the song played, the number from the SA kept moving around in my head. I kept repeating pieces of it silently, afraid I would forget. Downstairs, the fight kept going. I heard a thud, then a cry, then my brother's voice, low and angry. I bit my lip and picked at the loose threads on my pillowcase. I thought about calling. I thought about what would happen if I did. I thought about my parents finding out. I thought about my brother finding out. I thought about whether I would make everything worse. The song was short. When it ended, the same public service announcement played again. Almost the same, but this time the phone number came at the beginning, too. Then it repeated at the end. It felt like the radio was making sure I heard it. It felt like someone had leaned close and said, "Pay attention. This is for you." I took it as a sign. I slipped out of bed as quietly as I could. The floorboards in the hallway were old, and I knew which ones creaked, so I stepped carefully around them. I moved down the hall toward my parents' room, breathing through my mouth, trying not to make a sound. Their room was empty because they were downstairs, still caught in whatever nightmare my brother had created that night. My mother's cell phone was on the dresser. I picked it up with shaking hands. I had to repeat the number under my breath to keep it from falling apart in my mind. I dialed slowly, pressing each button like it might explode under my finger. Then I held the phone to my ear and waited. It rang. I do not remember the conversation very well. I remember a voice answering. I remember whispering because I was terrified someone downstairs would hear me. I remember saying my address. I remember saying my brother was hurting people. I remember the operator telling me I did the right thing. I remember being told that help was on the way. After I hung up, I put the phone back exactly where it had been. Then I crept back to my room, climbed into bed, and pulled the blankets over my head like I was much younger than I was. The saw played one final time. Then it faded into a different song. This one was softer and slower, led by what sounded like a church organ and small bells. It was almost like a lullaby. Downstairs, the shouting continued. But the song wrapped itself around the noise and softened it. I did not fall asleep before the sirens came. I heard them getting closer. I heard the sudden change downstairs when everyone realized they were coming to our house. I heard voices, pounding feet, the front door opening, strangers giving orders. I heard my brother yelling. I heard something hit the floor. Then, somehow, with that soft song still playing beside me, I fell asleep to the faint sounds of my brother being arrested below my room. He was not there in the morning. That should have been obvious, but it still felt strange. His shoes were not by the door. His jacket was not on the chair. His voice was not in the kitchen. The whole house felt different, like a storm had passed through and left everything broken but still standing. He was not there for months. That surprised me more than anything. As a kid, I did not really understand how fast life could change. I thought bad things were permanent. I thought if you lived with fear long enough, it became part of the walls and could never be removed. But then, almost overnight, the biggest reason I could not sleep was gone. My brother came back once, months later, just to get his things. He looked different, but not sorry. He did not talk to me. I did not talk to him. He packed quickly, kept his eyes away from mine, and left. After that, he was gone for good. I never spoke to him again. I do not want to, but I still slept with the radio playing every night. Years passed. I grew up. I learned how to sleep a little better, though never in silence. I learned to live in a house that was quieter but still carried old damage in small ways. My parents changed too, though not as much as I once hoped. Some things got better. Some things were never discussed. The holes in the walls were repaired. The broken doors were replaced. But the memory of those sounds stayed inside me. The radio stayed too. It followed me through everything without moving. While I studied for exams, it played beside me. When I was sick, it played. When I had my first heartbreak, it played through the night, while I stared at the ceiling and pretended I was not crying. When college acceptance letters came, it was there on the dresser, glowing softly with the wrong time, because I never bothered to set it perfectly. Today, as I packed the last of my room, I looked at it with quiet gratitude. This was my last day in that house. That night, I would leave for college. I would have a dorm room, or close enough to one. I would have new walls, new sounds, new people nearby, and a chance to become someone who did not feel like a frightened child every time a door slammed. I knew the radio had to come with me. I decided it should be the last thing packed and the first thing unpacked. That felt right. I would plug it in beside my new bed before I even unpacked my clothes. That way, the first night away from home would not be silent. The radio announcer was talking when I walked over to it. Friday, May 31st, they'll be headlining at the Cosmic Dance Floor in Springfield before heading up north on Saturday. I switched it off, cutting him off in the middle of the sentence. The room went quiet. For a second, I felt that old discomfort in my chest. Not fear exactly, but the memory of fear. Silence still had a shape to me. It still came too quickly. I leaned over the dresser and reached behind it to pull the cord from the wall. My fingers found the cord right away. But there was no pull. No resistance. The cord came up loose in my hand, limp and light. It had been hanging behind the dresser, trailing down to the floor. The plug was not in the wall. I frowned and bent lower, thinking maybe I had pulled it loose without realizing it. But the outlet was not even near where the cord had been hanging. There was dust on the floor behind the dresser, thick and undisturbed except for where the cord had rested. It did not look like it had been plugged in recently. For a few seconds, I just stared. Then I picked up the radio and turned it over. Maybe it had batteries. Maybe I had forgotten. That would make sense. Lots of radios had battery backup, especially ones with clocks. Maybe I had put batteries in it years ago and never thought about it again. I opened the battery compartment on the bottom. It was empty. There should have been AA batteries inside. There were none. The room felt colder. My heart began to thump hard in my chest. I turned the radio over in my hands, checking the cord again. checking the back, checking the battery slot like something might appear if I looked a second time. Nothing. No plug in the wall. No batteries. No power source at all. But it had been playing. It had been playing every night. It had been playing for years. With trembling hands, I set it back on the dresser. I stood there for a moment, afraid to touch the switch. Then I turned it on. Static cracked softly through the speaker, then cleared into the same announcer's voice, continuing as if I had never switched it off at all. Day, where they'll be opening for Parsonsfield at the Dial-Up Lounge in Portland. Get your tickets now because they're selling fast. The announcer paused. Then his voice changed. It became calmer, lower, familiar in a way that made every hair on my arms stand up. Don't hesitate before it's too late. I stumbled back from the dresser. The radio kept humming. Not music now, not static. Just that soft, waiting sound that had filled my room on so many nights when I was too scared to sleep. I looked at the cord lying useless on the floor. I looked at the empty battery compartment still open beside it. I looked at the little digital clock glowing on the front of the radio, bright and steady, though nothing in the world should have been powering it. For the first time in my life, I wondered if the radio had ever really been just a radio. Maybe it had not only covered the sounds I was afraid of. Maybe it had been listening to them. Maybe every night I thought it was protecting me from the dark, it was doing something else too. Waiting, watching, choosing the right song, finding the right voice, pushing the right message through the static at the exact moment I needed it. I should have been terrified. I was terrified. But under that fear, there was something else. Something that felt almost like comfort, because whatever that radio was, it had saved me once. And now, as I stood in my almost empty childhood room with my life packed into boxes around me, it was speaking again. I do not know what it was warning me about this time. I only know I am taking it with me. Story 3. Aspects of the Marrow House can look obscene or simply sickening, depending on where you stand on the lawn. From one angle, it only gives you a faint nausea, the kind you might ignore and blame on the heat. From another angle, it can trigger a sudden, violent anger that doesn't feel like your own, like something is pushing on your thoughts and trying to steer them into a rage. I know almost nothing about who built it. I don't even know for sure if there was only one builder, or if it was something assembled over years by different hands. But I know far more than I ever wanted to about what he left behind. If you're reading this, and you think you might be near that place, or near anything that feels like it, then you need to understand what happened to me. Because the house doesn't just sit there in the desert. It reaches, it changes, it spreads. Gravity does not behave around it the way it should. Weight doesn't behave normally either. By every rule of physics I've ever been taught, the structure should collapse in on itself. The angles don't make sense. The unsupported rooms don't make sense. The mass of it shouldn't be able to hold together, and yet it does, as if the ground and the air have agreed to forgive it. The outside is unsettling enough, but the inside is what matters if you want to survive whatever comes next. I'm going to explain what I saw and what I did as clearly as I can, because for your sake, and honestly, for everyone's sake, I don't think I can keep it to myself anymore. What happened was my fault. I can admit that. I can't hide behind bad luck. Curiosity has always been my biggest weakness, and when I found something this strange, I couldn't walk away. I'm writing this now because the consequences didn't stop with me. I used to think the worst thing that could happen from breaking into places was getting arrested or fined, maybe getting hurt, and having to explain it at the ER. If that had been the outcome, it would have felt like a dream. Instead, I think I did something worse. I think I tore a wound in reality itself. That sounds insane when you see it written out like that. It sounds like some new age nonsense. But if you've been noticing odd little things in your home lately, small pieces that don't belong, a shape in the corner of your eye that looks like metal and meat braided together, then please keep reading. My name is Phil, but in my local Urbex group, everyone calls me Pill. Urbex means urban exploration, breaking into abandoned buildings and exploring them for fun. Some people do it for photos. Some do it for history. Some just like the adrenaline. In Casa Grande, Arizona, where I live, there isn't much else to do if you don't have money or a hobby that keeps you indoors. It's a dusty, sunburnt place. Endless desert, endless heat, and the feeling that the world is bleached of color. If I'd grown up somewhere green, somewhere with rivers and forests and normal seasons, maybe I would have turned out different. Maybe I'd hike on weekends and fish and smile at strangers like people in nice postcard states. Instead, I grew up restless and bored and angry in small ways, the kind of kid who always wanted to test fences. I stayed out of prison mostly by luck. When I was 15, I ended up in juvenile detention after a break-in. I thought the place was abandoned. It was a rotting little shack out on the reservation, half falling apart, and I wanted to explore it. I remember how excited I was when I climbed through a window and realized it wasn't tagged and wasn't looted. In my mind, that meant it was untouched, a rare find. Most people in Urbex have a rule: don't take anything. Don't loot. Don't wreck the place. Take pictures and leave. At 15, I didn't have that kind of moral backbone. I was broke. I wanted weed money. The inside of the house looked like a hoarder's mess, and my teenage brain translated that into treasure. I went straight for the TV. The man who lived there found me in the act. He didn't care about my unique circumstances. He held me at gunpoint until the cops came. I learned some lessons. Not enough. I kept exploring, just with better timing and a little more caution. Urbex gave me some of the best moments of my life, and some of the worst. There's something addictive about forgotten places. Old mines, abandoned hospitals, aircraft graveyards, empty factories. They feel like secret worlds, like stepping into the past with a flashlight. Sometimes you find old papers in filing cabinets, still stacked like someone planned to come back. Sometimes you find objects you can't identify. Sometimes you feel like a kid again, full of wonder. Except now, the wonder has a darker edge because you know you shouldn't be there. I'm not the kind of explorer who strips copper or rips out boilers. I'm not hunting antiques to sell. I'm a thief in the smallest sense. I take little things I think won't matter. An odd tile, a small piece of hardware, a belt buckle, something trivial. Like taking a nice rock from a park, even though you know you shouldn't. I told myself it was harmless. I would do anything to go back and beat this hobby out of my younger self. If I could rewind my life and break my own hands the first time I climbed through a window, I would. It would have saved me a lot of terror, and it might have saved other people too. The place I'm about to describe was called the Marrow Residence. At least, that's what the mailbox said. It sat deep on the reservation, tucked at the far end of a dusty hillside near an abandoned gold mine. That was where it was yesterday. Today, I'm not even sure it exists in the way we think something exists. It happened on a Wednesday. I had just finished exploring an abandoned gold mine. A friend had sent me the GPS pin, and I'd spent 4 hours alone underground, crawling through tight spaces and old shafts, breathing stale air and feeling the earth press around me. When I finally climbed back out into daylight, I felt light and cheerful. The way you do when nothing bad happens and you get away with it. No police, no alarms, no angry owner with a gun. I stood there for a while, taking in the desert around me and admiring the clouds in the distance. Then I noticed something that didn't fit. Trees, not desert scrub or thin little things struggling to stay alive. These looked like big, healthy oaks, thick canopies of leaves moving in the wind. The sight made no sense. I stared at the tips of them poking over a hill and tried to remember if they'd been there when I arrived. I didn't think so, but memory is unreliable, and I told myself I must have just missed them. Curiosity won anyway. I walked up and over the hill. On the other side was an oasis that looked like a mistake. At the bottom of a lifeless desert gorge sat a perfect square acre of green forest. Real grass, wildflowers, dense roots. It looked as if someone had cut out a piece of another state and dropped it into Arizona. The air even sounded different. Leaves rustled and whispered in a way you don't hear in the desert. It was almost sensual, like the place wanted you to notice it. It wasn't impossible, not technically. An underground water source could do it. An aquifer, a hidden spring. I've done enough illegal and legal cave crawling to know water can create miracles in places you'd never expect. The thought of an undiscovered water cave made me feel giddy. I was already imagining myself telling my friends, already imagining the respect I'd get for finding something new. But it wasn't just a green patch. In the center of it was a house. At first, it was hard to see, tangled in branches and shadow. The more I looked, the more wrong it seemed. I'm not an architect. I can't name styles. But I know houses aren't supposed to look erratic. This one looked like it couldn't decide what shape it wanted to be. 2 stories, maybe more, slanted like it had partially sunk into the ground. The windows weren't neat squares. They were strange slashes, tarped off as if something had clawed through the walls, and the gaps had been turned into openings after the fact. The roof did something that made my stomach tighten. It didn't just sit on top. It spilled down one side like a waterfall of shingles, crawling across the ground like a vein. One entire room on the 2nd floor hung out over open air without support, like the house was daring gravity to argue. And at the highest point, looming above everything, was a huge church bell. It looked like a failed masterpiece. Like some rich eccentric started building a mansion, ran out of money halfway through, and then kept building anyway out of stubbornness. Ivy covered much of the exterior. The tarps were sun-bleached and loose. From a distance, it looked abandoned. From a distance, it looked like a dream you'd have after too much fever medicine. Of course I went down to explore it. If you tell me you wouldn't, I won't believe you. Something that unique, sitting in the middle of nowhere, is the kind of thing explorers live for. In the urbex world, knowing a spot nobody else knows is like a badge. It earns you status. I'd been shown so many places by other people, and I wanted to return the favor. I wanted to bring them something they'd never forget. I descended the slope toward that green square. It was about 3 in the afternoon. The sun hit hard when it wasn't blocked by passing clouds. Shadows slid across me as I climbed carefully down loose rock. When my boots finally hit the grass, the sensation was so wrong it almost made me laugh. Grass felt like something that belonged in another life. Then the house came closer, and my mood changed. It's hard to explain without sounding dramatic. The closer I got, the more the house made me feel sick. Not metaphorically. Physically, like bile rising, like nausea you can't talk yourself out of. And layered on top of that was an emotion that didn't make sense at all. Rage. It wasn't the kind of anger you feel when someone insults you. It was blind and directionless. It filled my head like pressure. My heartbeat started thudding in my ears. Each pulse felt like a drum. I wanted to punch something. I wanted to break something. And the target of that anger was the house itself. It was ridiculous. It was a building, but I hated it in that moment more than I've ever hated a person. I told myself it was just nerves, or heat stroke, or dehydration, or the adrenaline from the mine. I told myself it would pass once I got inside and proved it was just a weird, abandoned property. If an otherworldly feeling hits you like a warning, you should listen. I didn't. At the edge of the property, I found a mailbox. The name Marrow was stuck to the side in peeling letters. Seeing it helped ground me, like proof that this was a real place with a real owner at some point. I opened it to distract myself from the nausea and the anger. It was crammed full. Mail stuffed to the rim, bills and envelopes spilling out like an avalanche. A lot of it had bright red stamps that screamed important and foreclosed. So the guy really had gone bankrupt. That part fit my earlier thought. What didn't fit were the greeting cards. Dozens of them, all addressed to H. Marrow, no sender names, no return addresses, just a strange oily black smear where the sender information should be, like ink that had been rubbed by a thumb before it dried. One card had a postmark from Portland, another from Brazil, one from a city name I didn't recognize at all. The picture on that one made my skin prickle. It showed a city of black rock with buildings that rose like spears. The image was black and white and strangely out of focus, like the camera couldn't quite capture it. In the center stood an enormous clock tower, intricate and beautiful in a way that made my eyes linger. Above it, the sky had a cracking pattern like old glass. "Greetings from Locephalus," the card read. At the time, I thought it was a joke, a fake postcard, a movie reference, something from a niche book. Later, when I searched for the name, nothing came up. Reverse image searches found nothing, like it didn't exist anywhere except in that mailbox. There were 26 cards total. Only Locephalus looked truly abnormal. The others were real cities. But even those photos seemed oddly blurred, as if the camera couldn't focus on the world properly. Every date was smeared out with that same oily blot, and every signature looked the same, dark, thick, unreadable. I stood there, turning the cards over in my hands, and what bothered me most wasn't the weirdness. It was the logistics. There was no road down into this little canyon, no easy way for a mail truck. It would have been a nightmare route. And yet the mail was there, piled up like someone had been delivering it faithfully. Then, somewhere deeper on the property, the house made a sound. It wasn't wind. It was settling. Timbers groaning in a wet, cracking way that reminded me of bones popping when an old person stands. The noise made my rage spike again, and before I could stop myself, I shouted, "Shut up." I didn't plan to say it. The words came out like a reflex, frothing with anger that didn't fit the situation. Why would I tell a house to shut up? I stood there for a second, embarrassed and confused, as if someone had overheard me talking to myself. A smarter person would have left right then. I didn't. I pushed through the tall grass toward the building. The trees had looked healthy from above, but up close they were wrong. Every single one had a rotten hollow in its trunk, big enough that a person could crawl inside. That alone would have been strange, but what really bothered me was that every hollow faced the house. All of them, like mouths turned in the same direction, like something had crawled out of each trunk and made its way toward the building. The symmetry felt unnatural. It made my neck itch. It made me feel watched without being able to find eyes. My curiosity fought with my sickness and my rage. The bell above the house shifted in the wind and rumbled softly, not quite chiming, more like a stomach growl from something enormous. The leaves stopped rustling normally and began whispering, not in words I understood, but in fast, gossiping murmurs that sounded like judgment. I got the sense that if I turned around and looked into those hollows, I'd meet something I wasn't meant to meet. As I moved deeper into the acre, the roots became thicker. At first, it was just exposed roots in the grass. Then, they became ropes, then knots. Then the roots started growing upward like stems, crooked and angled, all pointing toward the house like compass needles. They formed walls of rootwood taller than a man. It became a maze of living structures bent toward one central thing. I squeezed between them and stumbled into a clearing. And that's when I knew, with a cold certainty, that the house was changing. The unsupported room I'd seen hanging off the right side of the building was now hanging off the left, like it had slid across the structure when I wasn't looking. The bell rumbled again. The trees whispered harder. I looked back at the roots and realized they were carved. Faces, thousands and thousands of faces carved into the roots, twisted with agony, men screaming silently, eyes wide, mouths stretched in pain. The expressions weren't random. They looked consistent, as if the same hand had made them again and again, obsessed with the same suffering. The roots weren't just roots. They were like a crowd, a forest of trapped people staring toward the house. The house itself looked taller than before. It looked wronger. New towers sprouted from the roofline like tumors, archer-style battlements with narrow slits. Chimneys bulged and twisted, uneven and swollen like infected flesh. The windows had rearranged into strange triangular patterns like fractals, and the tarps had somehow shifted to match them. I stood there dizzy, trying to convince myself my eyes were lying. Then the hatred hit me again, harder than before. It slammed into my mind from every direction, and for a moment I truly thought I might lose control and start attacking the building with my bare hands. The anger didn't feel human. It felt like an external force leaning into me. I forced myself to move, trying to circle the house and find an entrance. That should have been simple. A house has 4 walls. You can walk around it. This one didn't. I started walking and realized my sense of space was failing. Every time I thought I was reaching a corner, another wall appeared. Where I expected the structure to end, it kept extending. Walls sprouted where walls shouldn't sprout. Roof segments overlapped like stacked cards. Gargoyles perched on surfaces that couldn't possibly support their weight. One gargoyle was also a fountain, spitting water from the side of a chimney that had no base, no support, nothing that made sense. I don't know how long it took me to complete one lap. It felt like 10 minutes at least, maybe longer. The color of the house made my stomach turn too. It wasn't one consistent material. It was patchwork, like a quilt made out of different buildings. Faded robin's egg blue shifted into a sick brown, then into an ancient-looking red like an old carpet. A portion of the wall twisted like a helix, caving inward at the bottom and bulging out at the top. Everything about it looked like it had been assembled by someone who hated geometry. When I finally came back around to where I started, there was a door. It hadn't been there before, I'm sure of it, but now it stood on a concrete porch as if it had always belonged. The door was painted a fresh maroon, untouched by sun, and yet the brass knob was oxidized almost entirely turquoise, like it had aged for decades. A deer head knocker hung in the center, lace like brass. Onyx eyes that didn't reflect light. Its mouth was open just enough to show teeth that were too thick and strange, like something from a whale. I grabbed the knob. The moment I stepped inside, the rage vanished. It didn't fade. It didn't ease. It dropped off like a coat sliding from my shoulders. I felt an instant relief so strong it almost made me laugh. My head cleared. My stomach settled. I remember thinking, stupidly, thank God. The interior was just as wrong as the exterior, but in a different way. The main space was an open atrium with a spiral metal staircase rising impossibly high, 50 feet, maybe more. I couldn't see any floors above the first, just a ceiling far overhead that seemed too high for the size of the house. Off to the sides, through gaps and openings, I could faintly see rooms that looked fully furnished and brightly decorated, hanging in space with no visible way to reach them. At eye level, the room was almost boring. Desks lined the outer edges. Paper was stacked everywhere. Not modern paper, not really. Yellowed sheets full of holes, like brittle papyrus. Furniture was pushed away from the center as if the room had been arranged around one important object. A massive grandfather clock stood there, bolted down with huge metal brackets. Iron beams shot out of the walls to stabilize it, polished and clean as if they'd been installed yesterday. I'd seen factory machinery secured with less. It looked like they were trying to keep the clock from moving. I stood there, turning slowly, thinking, who would spend this kind of money? Why build this? Then the house made another settling sound. I looked up instinctively, and a ceiling was suddenly there. Plain plaster. 8 ceiling fans spinning in tight concentric circles. Their blades were all different styles, like they'd been pulled from different eras, and they spun so close together it looked like they should collide. That was the moment my rational brain finally admitted I was dealing with something outside normal rules. And here's the terrible part. Instead of turning and running, I got excited. Urbex is about the unknown. It's about going where you aren't supposed to go and seeing what most people never see. A house that broke reality felt, in that moment, like the coolest thing I could ever find. It felt like winning. It felt like proof that I was special, that I'd discovered something nobody else had. So, I did the dumbest thing possible. I decided to tag it. I pulled out my purple and black spray paint and started painting Pill on the wall in big block letters with jagged black outlines. Halfway through the first L, I noticed the paint wasn't dripping down like normal. It was crawling up. The purple line moved like a living thing climbing toward the ceiling. Then, it began to scab. Not like drying paint, like skin healing over a wound. Thickening, cracking, forming a raised surface like flesh. That was the moment fear finally punched through my excitement. Something in my mind clicked into place. You are not supposed to touch this. You are not supposed to mark it. You are not supposed to leave part of yourself here. I dropped the can and ran for the door. I yanked it open, and instead of outside, I saw a new room. It was like a bathroom for an indoor pool. Tile, porcelain, wet shine. Braziers on the walls burned with firelight, which made no sense alongside the modern tile. The time periods clashed like my brain had been slammed between centuries. I slammed the door shut, opened it again. Different room. Not outside. Not freedom. There were no other doors now, only open archways leading deeper. The windows were gone, or maybe they were hidden above the ceiling. The walls were new, clean, unmarked by my paint. A marble staircase curled down from the roof, supported by a cage of brass shaped like flowers. Each marble step was carved to look like rows of human teeth. I closed my eyes hard, hoping that when I opened them, the room would reset into something normal. When I opened them, the room had changed again. Every time I covered my eyes, the house became something else. Like it didn't want me to know its true layout. Like it was cycling through possibilities and testing what would break me. The only constant was the grandfather clock. It stayed in the center like an anchor. Tick, 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 a calm metronome inside madness. And then I noticed something else. The clock face wasn't 12 hours. It was 24. Each hour was a triangle section, like a pie cut into 24 slices. Each slice had a number and a tiny painting inside it. And the paintings were so detailed I couldn't believe they fit in that space. The first hour showed a peaceful field of flowers, a fawn resting, bees hovering like a children's book illustration turned real. The technique was masterful. Impossible, as the hours progressed, the paintings shifted. The first 8 hours were calm. Rivers, fields, bright skies. 9 through 18 became harsher. Deserts, broken plains, towns that looked abandoned, people with blurred faces and wrong proportions. I couldn't see their expressions clearly, but I felt their misery anyway. 19 through 23 were suffering made into art, war, disease, bodies, fire. Everything turned to browns and blacks and grays, with bright red violence staining each scene. The 24th hour was something else. The word came to my mind as if someone whispered it into my ear. Annihilation. The painting showed the world being destroyed in slow, cruel detail. Not just death, but humiliation of the living. Angels or things shaped like angels, carving into people with an intensity that made the demons in the corners look like they were crying. The image wasn't just a painting anymore. The longer I stared, the bigger it felt. Like it was stretching outward, opening up, swallowing my vision. The Black Spire city was in it. Locephalus, now in ruins. Then I heard footsteps above me. Tap, creak, slow and deliberate. Something hard clicking on metal with each step. The room changed again without my permission. Staircases spiraled everywhere like a forest. Between them were ceramic vases, hundreds of them. Tiny ones, huge ones, waist high, taller than my chest. I couldn't move without nearly bumping one. It felt designed, like the house wanted me to make noise. The footsteps came closer overhead. The ceiling above me was suddenly brick and low, almost close enough to touch. I panicked and did the only thing I could think of. I lifted the lid off the biggest vase near me, climbed in, and pulled the lid over myself. It was cramped and smelled like dust and cold clay. I pressed my knees to my chest and tried not to breathe loudly. The footsteps hit one of the metal staircases with a heavy, slow rhythm. Click, click, aching. Vases, vases, a man's voice croaked. Old, thin, almost amused, almost exhausted. Must you torment me so? He muttered, not quite to me, not quite to himself. Then something shattered. He struck a vase. The sound exploded through the room like a gunshot. Ceramic broke into 1,000 pieces. He kept walking, and he kept smashing. Each shatter sounded closer. I held my breath until my chest ached. I imagined the vase I was hiding and tipping over and cracking open, exposing me like a bug. I imagined him dragging me out. Then the smashing drifted away toward the clock. I lifted the vast lid slightly and peeked. The man was older than I expected. Older than I thought a person could look and still move. He was very short. His spine curved forward so sharply it made his back look like the ridge of a fish. His scalp was covered in liver spots with only thin white hair left. His shoulders looked half dislocated, pulled forward by age. The most shocking thing was that he was completely naked. He carried a briefcase in one hand and the cane in the other. His feet bled from walking on shards, but he didn't seem to notice. He set the briefcase on a vase and opened it. Inside were objects that looked like they came from no single world. Coiled metal pieces like keys, pipes with teeth, spirals that shimmered like oil on water. Then he pulled out something that made my stomach flip. A small, withered human head carved out of oak. So realistic, I almost gasped. He held the wooden head up to the clock face and began chanting under his breath. The house groaned and bucked around him, louder than ever, like it was straining against an invisible harness. The bell far above laughed in a booming trill. But the carved head did something. The clock's seams relaxed like muscles unclenching. A panel of mahogany dropped open. I hadn't seen any door there before, but now the inside of the clock was exposed. It wasn't just gears. It was everything. Tubes, pistons, clocks within clocks, modern LED displays, and machines that looked like they belonged in a future I couldn't imagine. It was like the clock contained every century at once, past, present, and something beyond. Everything moved in perfect timing, packed so tightly that nothing should have been able to function, and yet it did, as if the laws of collision didn't apply. It was horrifying, and it was beautiful. I hate admitting that, but it's true. For a moment, I felt an urge to crawl into it, to become part of it, like it could give me a place and a purpose and a kind of clean perfection my messy life never had. The old man offered a small ivory carving of a hippo to two tiny animatronic arms hanging inside the clock. The arms moved with perfect precision, dodging pistons at the last second. Pipes shifted aside to reveal a modern alarm clock fused with a small stone sundial. The old man produced a copper rod and clicked a button. A tiny model of planets began to spin at the tip, glowing like a miniature sun. He held it over the sundial. The alarm clock's digital display rewound rapidly to 0. Mechanisms slid aside to reveal chrome technology wired into the clock like nerves. He offered the oily key, then pulled out a flute and played 24 notes. Each note sounded slightly less skilled than the last, like his breath was failing. The chrome glow stopped. The machinery shifted again, exposing a water wheel turning in a current of floating blood. I was staring so hard I forgot to breathe. And then I made a mistake that I can't stop replaying. I called out. Hello? I shouted, my voice cracking in the silence between shatters and ticks. The old man startled. He dropped the oily key. He whipped around with a speed that didn't belong in a body that old. Eyes wide, mouth hanging open in shock. He took one step back, terrified, and that was all it took. The clockwork sprang out like a net. Fine wires shot forward, impossibly sharp, puncturing the back of his skull and burrowing under the skin like worms. There was no blood. The clock didn't waste it. His face went dry and pale in seconds. His eyes shriveled in their sockets, dangling by cords like rotten fruit. His lips cracked like paper. His skin loosened and sagged like meat slipping off bone. I couldn't scream. I just watched, stunned and sick, as if my brain had turned to mush. Probes shot out from inside the clock and locked into his shoulders with a series of loud cracks. His body jerked as if it was being taught new movements. Skin sagged further as wet muscle began to grow inside the clock, as if man and machine were switching places. He groaned. He was still alive. Somehow his fingers jerked, nails splitting to reveal small brass blades. His hands cut into his own stomach as if commanded. The abdomen opened. Organs spilled out, not falling, but moving, supported by spider-like clockwork legs and living brass wires. They crawled, swarmed, and were guided into the clock's open cavity. The clock shuddered like it was breathing for the first time. The old man's heart beat slowly, uncertainly, still beating while pieces of him were rearranged. Inside the clock's belly, the organs settled into compartments like rooms in a dollhouse made of flesh. Wet walls of tissue formed with bone scraps used as beams. Everything was assembled with a disgusting care, as if it was building a miniature home out of him. Then, as if that wasn't enough, the machine began to rebuild him. His skin tightened again over a new framework. Pistons ran down his arms and legs. Wires wrapped in muscle fiber became tendons. He grew taller, filling with mechanisms until he was almost twice his original height. Skin cracked in places, revealing brass gears beneath. And the worst part, the part that makes me want to vomit even now, is that I found the exposed machinery beautiful. Clean, purposeful, perfect, he took a jerking step like a newborn animal. Tiny mechanical arms burst through the front of his skull, snapping through his eye sockets with a dry crack. Those arms reached toward me, beckoning, not threatening exactly, inviting, like a mother reaching for a child. The thing tried to speak. It forced air through a throat that wasn't a throat anymore. Each attempt came out as a shrill whistle, lips flapping over a dry tongue that moved like a flag in wind. It wanted words, but didn't know how to shape them yet. I blinked through tears, and when I opened my eyes, the room had changed again. The vases were gone. The staircases were gone. The room looked almost normal now. Shaggy office carpet, low light bulbs, desks pushed back. The clock was still bolted down, trembling like it wanted to tear free. The clock face raced toward the 24th hour. And in the tiny painting behind the hands, I saw the old man as the centerpiece of annihilation, his chest pulled open to reveal clockwork where organs should have been. Like the painting wasn't just a picture, but a place the house could reach into and adjust. That's when I understood what the clock really was. It wasn't a clock that looped. It was a countdown timer. The old man had been winding it back again and again, keeping it from reaching the last hour. For how long? Years? Decades? I have no idea. But I had interrupted him, and now his role had been stolen and twisted. Now he guarded the clock in a new way, not to stop it, but to make sure it finished. I didn't know what would happen at 24. I still don't fully know, but I knew it would be bad. The thing managed a sound that almost resembled a word. Go, W-W, it whistled, jaw clacking in frustration. Go, G-O, goop. The little arms in its eye sockets pointed toward the open door, toward the trees and sunlight beyond. I didn't argue, I ran. I ran past the root walls carved into screaming faces, past the whispering trees, past the mailbox, which now spilled greeting cards like an impossible, endless flood. Every card, every single one, read the same message now. Greetings from Los Cephalus. I reached my car and drove like I'd stolen it. The freeway felt unreal. Driving felt wrong, like my hands didn't belong on the steering wheel anymore. My life, my apartment, the normal world, I couldn't make them fit with what I'd just seen. I'm a coward. I've had enough time to admit that. There are good cowards and bad ones. A good coward is afraid and still tries. A bad coward is afraid and lets fear be an excuse to do nothing. I was the bad kind. I didn't try to wind back the clock. I didn't even consider it for more than a second. I left. I let the timer reach the end because I couldn't imagine going near it again. At some point, the clock struck the 24th hour. And since then, things have been appearing in my apartment. At first, it was small pieces of clockwork. Gears, wires, brackets, metal bits that didn't belong anywhere near my home. They would be in corners, behind furniture, in the shadows where you don't look until you feel like you're being watched. That alone was unsettling, but I would have taken it. I would have lived with random metal appearing if that was all it meant. It wasn't. Now there are 5 anomalies in my place, trapped in different rooms because I don't know what else to do with them. They're like attempts at life. The clock trying to learn how to create. One is in my bathtub. It looks like a dead crab, but its claws are animatronic, and its body is full of tiny pistons that simulate movement. It scuttles even though it shouldn't be able to. It snaps at me with stubborn determination. I tried to stomp it once, out of panic. It didn't break. It didn't even react like something that felt pain. Another is in a cupboard I reinforced with boards because I couldn't stand to see it roaming. It's a severed deer head attached to segmented metal tubes, crawling like an octopus on land. When it moved, it made soft scraping sounds that got under my skin. As I sealed it in, it whispered my name. It has no lungs, no throat, no body. It whispered anyway. It is learning. It is getting closer to something that works. There is a balance between flesh and machine, and whatever this thing is, it's hunting for that balance. It plays God. Or maybe it is a god. I don't know. I only know I started this, and I can't stop it. After the first two creations showed up, I drove back to where the Marrow House had been. I told myself I had to do something, even if it felt pointless. Like trying to stop a bullet wound with a bandage. I needed to see it again. I needed to know if there was a way to reverse it, or at least understand what I'd unleashed. There was nothing. No house, no lush square of forest, no bell, no root maze. The desert looked normal. The only sign that anything had ever been there was the mailbox, sitting alone like a joke, and next to it, a massive heap of greeting cards, all identical, all saying the same thing. Greetings from Locephalus. When I returned home, more minor abominations appeared. More metal, more strange shapes. More evidence that something was building itself slowly, using my space as a workshop. And now, as I finish writing this, trying to document my mistake, trying to leave a trail for someone smarter than me, I hear something bigger in the apartment. Heavy footsteps. Then, scratching. Then a kick against the door. It's inside. And it speaks with my voice. I'm so sorry. Fear not, brothers and sisters of the Obsidian City. I believe our stay in Locephalus won't be half as bad as we think. Come see the Obsidian spires and take heart. Come see the clock in all its unstoppable glory and witness divinity with your own eyes. Under bleeding skies and broken stars, we will be made one. As the herald of Locephalus, I invite you to the Marrow House. We will celebrate the unification of an imperfect planet. The clockwork is freer than flesh. Skin is dull compared to the ecstasy of perfect motion. You will feel pistons fire in perfect rhythm. You will feel gears turn without chaff. You will wonder why you ever accepted pain and hunger and rot as normal. Crawl out of your shells. Accept our gracious host. Seek the city. You will be free. We will be free. Together. Story 4, I was staying at my grandmother's house in the village. The kind of place where time moves slower and nights feel louder because there isn't much else to drown the sounds out. One evening, my cousin and I climbed up to the rooftop to sit and talk. In that area, rooftops were like extra rooms. People went up there to cool off, dry clothes, or just breathe when the house felt too crowded. We were sitting near the edge, legs folded, looking out over the neighboring roofs. That's when we noticed movement on the rooftop beside ours. A little girl was running in circles. At first, it looked like normal child behavior, restless energy, the kind kids get when they're finally outside. But the longer we watched, the stranger it felt. She wasn't playing with anything. She wasn't chasing anyone. She wasn't stopping to catch her breath. She just ran around and around, sometimes stopping abruptly to laugh, then starting again like she couldn't help it. My cousin went stiff next to me. He didn't just look uneasy. He looked afraid. We should go downstairs, he said. I frowned. We just came up here. He kept his eyes on the other roof. You don't get it, he said quietly. That girl is possessed. I actually smirked. I'm not proud of it, but that was my first reaction. I was younger and convinced I was smarter than village superstition. In my mind, the village always went for the dramatic explanation because it was easier than admitting something could be psychological. I told him maybe she had some kind of mental problem, or maybe she was just a hyper kid acting strange because people were watching her. He didn't laugh. He didn't argue back the way he usually did. He just repeated, calmer but firmer, that we needed to go downstairs. So I went with him, mostly to end the conversation. I was sure he was being dramatic, and I told myself I'd come back up later to prove there was nothing to be scared of. The next day, my cousin warned me again. He said we shouldn't go to the rooftop because the girl might be there again. I rolled my eyes and suggested we could go earlier and leave earlier, like we were avoiding bad weather instead of a child. He shook his head. Go check first, he said. If she's not there, call me. Then I'll come. That annoyed me, but I went anyway. I climbed up, looked across at the neighboring rooftop, and at first I didn't see her. I called him down and told him it was clear. When he came up, he started talking like he'd been waiting for the chance. He said the girl and her family were new to the village. When they first arrived, she was normal. She talked, she smiled, she acted like any other kid. Then, after they started living in that house, she changed. He didn't say she started acting different. He said it the way people say something has been replaced. She became possessed. I'll be honest, I like listening to stories like that. Not because I believed them, but because the village had a way of telling horror like it was history. Every house had a rumor. Every empty plot had a warning. It was entertainment, the way scary movies are entertainment, except it felt closer because it was happening across the roof from where I was sitting. So I asked him to tell me everything he'd heard. He said there were two versions people whispered about. One version was that a tomb had once been there, a grave that shouldn't have been touched. The builder allegedly broke it apart to build the house, and whatever had been buried there didn't leave. It stayed under the floors, under the walls, and it didn't like having a house built on top of it. The other version was worse. People said the previous owner had killed his wife and children, cut them into small pieces, and buried them under the house. Not in the yard, under the house itself. Like he wanted them to stay there forever. Hearing it made my stomach tighten, but I still filed it under village myths. Stories that grow sharper every time they're repeated. People love drama. People love a mystery with a monster in it. Then we looked up, and the girl was there again. She was on her rooftop, running in circles like the day before, laughing to herself, stopping suddenly and starting again, as if someone invisible was telling her when to move. My cousin's voice dropped. Her father locks her on the rooftop every day, he said. That made me angry in a different way than fear. If that was true, it wasn't supernatural. It was abuse. What? I snapped. That's child abuse. We should confront her father, my cousin shook his head quickly. No, he loves her, he insisted. He takes care of her all day. He doesn't hurt her. Then why lock her up there? Because she doesn't sleep, he said. Not at all. If she stays inside, no one sleeps. She keeps shouting. She keeps running. She keeps doing that. I crossed my arms, still trying to force logic into it. Are you sure she doesn't just sleep during the day? He shook his head like I didn't understand the basics. No, she doesn't sleep. After a while, we went downstairs the way we always did. We ate dinner. The adults talked. The ceiling fan squeaked. Someone watched TV at a low volume. Eventually, everyone went to bed. It felt normal again, which made me think the rooftop scene was being exaggerated in my head. Then, in the middle of the night, I heard shouting. It didn't sound like a kid playing. It sounded angry, strained, like someone arguing with someone who wasn't answering back. I tried to wake my cousin. I leaned over and whispered, "Hey." I heard a shout. He barely opened his eyes. Half asleep, he muttered, "Make it a habit. She does that all the time." Then he added, more clearly, "And don't make the mistake of seeing her. You'll get disturbed." I should have listened. But the shouting didn't stop, and I couldn't tell if it was fear or curiosity that got me moving. I told myself maybe the girl was hurt. Maybe her father had done something. Maybe this was a situation that actually needed help. So I went to the balcony. From where I stood, I could see her window directly across from ours. The shouting came from that direction. I leaned forward carefully, trying not to make noise. I saw her. Her back was facing me. Her shoulders moved like she was arguing with someone inside the room. Her arms jerked slightly, not like she was gesturing the way people do, but like she was pulling against something. I didn't think. I just called out, loud enough for her to hear. "What happened?" The second the words left my mouth, everything changed so fast that my brain couldn't keep up. Dark clouds slid over the moon like something had dragged a curtain across the sky. The wind stopped completely, not faded. Stopped. The village went unnaturally still, like even the dogs had decided to hold their breath. The light on our balcony flickered once, twice, then steadied again. The bulb buzzed faintly. The girl's shadow on the wall across from me began to fade, as if the darkness itself was swallowing her outline. The only thing that caught the moonlight was her hair, tangled, messy, glimmering in thin strands. She started to turn. Slowly, not the way someone turns when they respond to being called. Not like surprise, not like annoyance. It felt deliberate, like she wanted me to understand that I had made a mistake. As she turned, she let out a huge, terrifying shout, and her face slammed up close to mine. Not physically, not in a way I can explain. One moment she was across the way, and the next moment her face was right there, close enough that I could see texture, close enough that my body reacted like something had invaded my space. I froze. My heart felt like it was about to burst. Every part of me screamed to move, but I couldn't. It was like fear had nailed my feet to the floor. Then I snapped out of it and ran back inside, stumbling over my own steps. I turned toward where my cousin had been sleeping, ready to shake him awake, ready to yell that something was wrong. But it wasn't my cousin against the wall. It was her. The girl stood in the room like she belonged there. Her hair hung over her face, but I could still feel her eyes on me, steady and cold. She tilted her head slightly and said, in a voice that sounded too calm for a child, "I told you not to go." My mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. Then I forced words out like I had to push them through something thick. Where did my cousin go?" I cried. "What did you do?" She smiled just a little. "You want to see him?" she asked softly. "Why don't you check the rooftop?" My legs moved before my mind agreed. I don't know why. Fear should have stopped me, but it didn't. It pushed me forward like I had no choice. I ran out into the hallway and started climbing the stairs up to the rooftop. As I climbed, I heard my cousin's voice. He was panting, like he'd been running for a long time. And then I heard his laughter. It wasn't normal laughter. It was stretched thin, like it was coming from someone who didn't have anything else left to do. I shouted his name as I reached the rooftop, but our roof was empty. Then I looked to the side. On the rooftop beside ours, in the place where the girl usually ran, I saw him. He was wearing my cousin's clothes, but he didn't look like my cousin anymore. His hair had grown long and matted, like he hadn't combed it in years. It didn't look like hair that had grown in a few minutes. It looked like hair that had grown over centuries. His back was crooked, his shoulders hunched, his movements jerky. His face looked older, stretched and tired in a way that made my stomach turn. Like the child I knew had been pulled forward through time and left to rot. He was running in circles. He fell, got up, laughed, and ran again, over and over. I stood there shaking, unable to process what I was seeing. My mind kept trying to force it into something logical. Hallucination, nightmare, stress. But it didn't feel like a dream. The air felt too real. The night felt too cold. My heartbeat was too loud. Then a small shape climbed onto my shoulder. I screamed and twisted, but it held on tightly, clinging to me like a monkey. A boy's voice whispered into my ear, close enough that his breath touched my skin. "Now, I am your cousin," I started crying. I couldn't stop. "But you don't look like him," I said. "His parents, they'll know. They'll know you aren't their son." The voice stayed calm, almost gentle, like it was comforting me. "No one will know," it whispered. "His parents will think I have always been their child, and your cousin." I don't remember walking back downstairs. I don't remember closing the door. I only remember that I didn't sleep. He sat next to me all night. His hair kept falling over his face, but I could feel him staring directly at me through it. Even when I shut my eyes, I felt watched. Every time I moved, the mattress shifted slightly, like he adjusted to stay close. Morning came like nothing had happened. I heard plates clinking. I smelled tea. I heard voices downstairs. Normal voices. The kind that make you feel crazy because the world sounds fine. When I finally looked through the crack of my door, I saw him sitting at the table, eating breakfast with my cousin's parents. He held his spoon the way my cousin held it. He nodded at the right moments. He even laughed softly when my aunt said something. No one reacted like anything was wrong. The only thing anyone noticed was the light flickering in the room. My uncle complained about it, tapping the switch as if that would fix whatever was happening. My aunt shook her head, annoyed, and said they should call someone to check the wiring. I didn't go down for breakfast. I couldn't. I stayed upstairs and wrote this instead, because writing is the only way I can hold on to the truth while everyone else acts like it never existed. So I'm telling you the one thing I wish someone had told me. If you ever see someone running in circles on a rooftop nearby, don't watch. Don't call out. Don't try to be brave. Don't try to explain it. Just get away from there. Story 5. I never really knew my paternal great-aunt, Annette. My family is close in the way a lot of families like to pretend they are. Birthdays, group chats, holidays where both sides show up and somehow get along. Annette was the one exception. She lived alone and seemed proud of it. She never married, never had kids, and never acted like she wished she had. My dad mentioned once or twice that she was obsessed with birdwatching. From what I understood, she only left her house to do weekly grocery shopping and then went right back inside. That was her whole world, and she guarded it. I'd been to her house maybe once or twice, and only when I was very young. The memory I have is vague but sharp in the way childhood memories can be. The smell of mold, the dimness, the sense that I should keep my hands to myself. I also remember that she wasn't kind to me the way my grandma was. Not cruel exactly, just distant, like I was a visitor she hadn't invited. When she died a few years ago, most of the family went to her funeral. People cried, but it didn't feel like they were crying for her. It felt like they were mourning the idea of her, the fact that she existed, and now didn't. By that point, my dad was already gone, and so was my grandma. On that side of the family, I was basically all that was left. That meant it fell on my mom and me to deal with her will and the leftovers of her life. Anything with real financial value got handled quickly. The rest was packed into cardboard boxes and spread out between our homes, shoved into basements and spare rooms to gather dust. Recently, my mom started planning renovations and asked if I could help clear junk out of her basement. She made it sound like a normal favor, just an afternoon of hauling boxes and deciding what to keep and what to toss. I wish that's all it had been. I went over on my day off. My mom had work, so she gave me a spare key the day before and told me to start without her. For the first couple hours, I did exactly what she wanted. Old kitchen appliances that hadn't worked in years, broken toys from when I was a kid, random furniture parts, dusty bins of holiday decorations. I made piles, trash, donate, ask Mom. It was almost nice in a weird way. There was a small nostalgic comfort in touching old pieces of my childhood and realizing they'd been sitting quietly under the house all this time. When I was nearly done, I noticed a small cardboard box shoved into the far corner of the basement. It had Annette's name written on it in black marker. I carried it upstairs with the rest, relieved because it felt like the last thing. I set it on the kitchen table and told myself I'd leave it there for Mom to look at later. Then I realized I had time to kill until she got home, and my curiosity got the better of me. The box was heavier than I expected, like it was packed tight. I pictured random trinkets, old birdwatching magazines, maybe some antique binoculars. But when I opened it, there was only one thing inside, a thick photo album. On the front, in simple letters, it said family. That hit me harder than I expected. Annette, of all people, with a family photo album? The woman who barely showed up to family gatherings? It didn't fit. Still, I felt this warm little spark of interest. I imagined there might be photos I'd never seen. Maybe old pictures of my dad as a kid, my grandma when she was young, stuff like that. I opened it. The first thing I noticed was that I didn't recognize a single photo. Not one. They were all normal scenes. Birthdays, barbecues, holidays, family trips, group shots in backyards. Nothing dramatic. Nothing staged. The kind of pictures every family has in boxes and frames. Except in every single one, there was a missing person. Not blurred, not cut off at the edge, not hidden behind someone. Just absent. There would be empty space between two people, the gap too wide to be natural. Someone would have an arm draped around nothing, their hand hanging in midair as if resting on an invisible shoulder. There would be a place at a table with a plate of food on it, steam rising, a drink beside it, and no one sitting there. In one picture, a birthday cake was being carried toward a group, and there was a space in the crowd where the candle's light reflected off nothing at all. It wasn't subtle. It was consistent, and it happened in every photo, as if the album was built around that absence. My first thought was the most normal one my brain could manage. Annette must have hated someone. Maybe she had a grudge, and at some point she paid someone to edit them out. It sounded ridiculous when I thought it, because I couldn't picture Annette learning to use email, let alone hiring someone to Photoshop an entire album. But I didn't have another explanation. Still, there was a problem. I was pretty sure I could see everyone in our immediate family scattered throughout the photos. My mom, my dad, grandparents, aunts, uncles. So, who was missing? Who could be present in all these events, but also somehow not someone any of us immediately noticed? When my mom got home, I showed her the album. I watched her flip through the pages with a mild frown. She didn't look confused the way I felt. She looked irritated, like she'd already decided what it was. "It's probably Tony," she said, shutting the album like that settled it. Annette never approved of him. She thought he was, because he's gay. Tony is my mom's cousin. I've met him a handful of times at weddings and holiday parties. He always seemed fine to me. But even if Annette didn't like him, Would he really have been in the original version of every single photo in this book? Birthdays, picnics, random gatherings? It didn't make sense. My mom seemed so sure that I didn't push. We had other basement junk to sort through. We filled trash bags, made donation piles, argued lightly over what was still useful. She invited me to stay for dinner afterward, and I did. Before I left, I asked if I could take the album home for a few days. I made up a reason about wanting to copy some pictures. My mom shrugged and said sure. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I asked other family members what they thought, trying to keep it casual so I didn't sound like a conspiracy theorist. But what I got back made things worse. Everyone I asked had a different answer, and they all said it like it was obvious, like I was stupid for asking. My Aunt Emma insisted it was her Uncle Jeffrey. My third cousin Nathan swore it was one of his exes. Someone else said it was an in-law who used to cause drama. Another person said it was a family friend who used to be around all the time. No two people agreed. And what disturbed me most was that they weren't guessing. They were confident, fiercely confident. They remembered the events in the photos clearly, yet they couldn't agree on who was missing from them. Around that time, I noticed something else. In most of the photos where I was a kid, I looked terrified, not uncomfortable, not shy. Terrified. In those pictures, I wasn't looking at the camera or at the cake or at my mom. I was staring directly at the empty space where the missing person should have been, like I was watching something no one else could see. That was when I started losing sleep. And when I did sleep, I had the same dream again and again. A family picnic on a sunny day. I'm a kid, laughing, throwing a ball back and forth with a smiling man. But the man's upper face is a blur of light, like the sun is sitting where his eyes should be. In the dream, I'm happy and scared at the same time, like I want to run, but I can't stop playing. I needed more answers. Annette had kept this album for a reason. If there were more boxes of her things, maybe there were more clues. So I went down into my own basement. I hadn't looked through my stored stuff in years. I dug through Christmas decorations, old paint buckets, gardening tools, a broken mini-fridge I always meant to throw out. I was sweating and dusty by the time I found it, another box with Annette's name written on it, tucked behind the mini-fridge like someone had hidden it. The second I opened it, a smell hit me so hard I gagged. It was sharp and sweet at the same time, like chlorine mixed with candy, like licorice and cleaning chemicals. It didn't smell like mold or rot. It smelled wrong in a way I can't describe properly. And the worst part was that I recognized it immediately. That smell pulled a memory out of me like a hook. I was about 10 years old again. My best friend back then was a kid named Lucas. We aren't in touch now. His family moved to Canada less than a year after all this, and we just drifted. But that summer, we spent our days riding bikes, building dumb forts, and playing ding-dong ditch around my neighborhood. We thought it was the funniest thing in the world. One of us would knock on a door and run, and the other would hide behind a tree or a car, watching. My parents were well liked in the neighborhood, so if I ever got caught, people usually just laughed and told me not to do it again. Lucas lived out past the outskirts of town, down some country roads. I'd walk there sometimes on my own because my parents trusted me. On the way, there was one house you had to pass. It looked normal enough, decent yard, normal shape, nothing obviously abandoned, but there was never a car in the driveway, and the yard always smelled strange. Chewing tobacco and pond scum. A dirty, wet smell that didn't match the dry street around it. That house made us uneasy, even before anything happened. One day, Lucas and I stole one of his dad's beers and split it, which made us feel like we were invincible criminals. We were giddy and stupid. Lucas dared me to ding-dong ditch at the weird house. I acted like it was nothing. I told him it would be easy. He hid to the left side of the house while I swaggered up to the front door, trying to look fearless. The moment I knocked, the door opened. Not after a delay, not after footsteps. It opened like someone was already standing there, hand on the knob, waiting for the exact second I touched the door. A man stood in the doorway. Bald, tight gray beard, average height. If you passed him in a store, you wouldn't look twice. But his eyes were wrong. Too large, too dark, animal eyes. The kind of eyes that look like they don't have a human thought behind them. He was wearing a suit, which felt strange for that house, that area, that time of day. His lips were bleeding in a few places like he'd been chewing them. The blood looked fresh. I froze, my brain scrambling for an excuse. A wrong address. A lost dog. Anything, it's too late to pick another door, he said calmly. I didn't understand. I stared past him into the house, and what I saw made my stomach turn cold. The inside was dim, lights off, but I could still make out odd details. A grandfather clock stood against the wall, but it had no hands. The floorboards were painted blue, not carpet, not tile, painted wood. And from deeper in the house, music played. Reelin' in the Ears by Steely Dan. I only recognized it because my dad loved that song. He played it in the car sometimes. Hearing it there felt like hearing my own name spoken by a stranger. W what? I stammered. The man smiled wide, like he was delighted. Yes, he said, and his voice got playful in a way that made my skin crawl. You go up to their door and knock on it. Knock, knock. Just like that. Knock, knock. Let me in. Then he lifted his hand and mimed knocking by rapping his knuckles lightly against my forehead. His knuckles were cold, not cool from shade, cold like metal. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness behind him, I realized the house was full of bees. Not a few, a swarm. They buzzed in slow circles through the hallway and around the man's head. I couldn't understand why they weren't trying to get outside. It was like they belonged in there. You've been a nosy boy, the man whispered, still smiling. A bad, nosy, little naughty, nosy boy. I'm sorry, I tried to say. His smile vanished, and he leaned forward and screamed directly into my face. It wasn't an angry human yell. It was a sudden animal scream, violent and loud enough that I flinched backward and felt spit hit my cheeks. His breath reeked of cough syrup, like he'd been drinking it straight. It made my eyes water. Then he stopped instantly, as if someone had flipped a switch in him, and he went back to staring at me. I stood frozen, too scared to run, too scared to speak. A bee landed on his face and crawled into his nostril. He didn't blink. He didn't react. He didn't even twitch. You won't tell anybody what you saw, he said quietly. Not a question, a fact. Because if you do, I'll creep into your room late at night when you're asleep and get you. And no one will ever know. That was too much for a kid to hold. I think I actually peed myself a little. I remember the hot shame of it, the terror, the feeling that I'd never be safe again. The man slammed the door in my face. I ran. I ran so hard my lungs hurt. Lucas was gone by the time I reached the street. I didn't blame him. I ran all the way home and told my dad, because even at 10, I knew a grown-up had to handle something like that. My dad's face changed in a way I still remember clearly. Angry and scared at the same time, like he was trying to decide whether to break something or run. He asked what house it was. Then he called the police and told them a man had threatened to kill his son. Later, we were told the house was between owners. Empty. There shouldn't have been anyone inside at all. The police patrolled the area for a while. They never found the man. That didn't comfort me. It made it worse. It meant he could be anywhere. It meant he could still be waiting. I barely slept for months. I kept expecting him to appear at night like he promised, but I never saw him again, and I never played Ding Dong Ditch again either. Standing in my basement now, smelling that same sickly, sweet chemical scent rising from Annette's box, I felt the exact same cold dread spread through my body. I hadn't thought about that day in years, but the smell made it real again, like the memory had been stored inside the cardboard. Inside the box were layers of bubble wrap. I peeled them back and found only a few items: a VH tape, a single photograph, and a pair of binoculars. The binoculars were the first thing I touched. They were old but sturdy, heavy in my hands. I lifted them to my face, expecting dust and a dim view of my basement. I saw nothing. The lenses had been painted completely black, not tinted. Painted like someone deliberately made sure you couldn't look through them at all. I set them down, confused and uneasy. The photograph was next. It didn't show a missing person, at least not at first glance. It was a picture of me and my mom sitting with Mr. Carter and his son, Miles. I looked about 7. Miles looked about the same age. Mr. Carter was my Uncle Trevor's best friend, someone who showed up at family events sometimes. I didn't remember Miles well, but I remembered we got along fine. Mr. Carter died in a car accident not long after that photo must have been taken. I remembered hearing adults talk about it in hushed voices. Miles ended up in foster care. After that, he disappeared from my life completely, and I never really thought about him again. The VH tape was the last piece. I dug around until I found my old VH player, the one I'd kept for no good reason other than laziness and sentimentality. I hooked it up, slid the tape in, and sat close to the TV like I was afraid the room would change behind me. The tape had one short home video. It showed one of the gatherings from Annette's album, a family picnic. Everyone was there, laughing, eating, talking over each other. The camera moved through faces and familiar voices. It felt normal for about 3 seconds. Then I saw him, the man from the house, clear as day, laughing along with my family like he belonged there. No suit, no bleeding lips. He looked more ordinary, like someone's friend or distant relative. But it was him, the same eyes, the same wrongness I felt in my bones the moment he appeared on screen. My arms prickled with goosebumps so hard it hurt. The camera panned away for a moment, and it landed on a child crying on the grass, sobbing like his chest was going to split open. I recognized him immediately as Miles. Same face as in the photograph, same age. He looked terrified, like he could see something no one else could. Then the camera panned back to the group. The man was gone. No one reacted. No one looked around. They kept laughing and talking like he had never been there at all, like his presence had been erased in real time, not just from photographs. I sat there, with my mouth open, feeling like the room had tilted. After that, I tried to show the tape to other people, because I needed someone else to see it. I needed proof that I wasn't alone inside this. When I showed my mom, her reaction didn't make sense. She got furious, not scared, not sad, angry in a sharp, irrational way I hadn't seen from her in years. She told me never to show her that again and left my house in the middle of lunch. She ignored my calls afterward. When I finally got her to speak to me, she acted like she had no idea what I was talking about. I sent a video recording of the tape to other family members. No one replied. My cousin Nate blocked my number. A few others left me on read and never responded again. It felt less like disbelief and more like avoidance, like I'd showed them something they weren't allowed to acknowledge. For the first time, I considered that some of them might be in on it. or that whatever this was didn't just erase itself from photos, it erased itself from people's minds when they got too close. The only person I could think to call was Uncle Trevor. If anyone would remember Mr. Carter and Miles, it would be him. He'd been closest to them. I sent him the video. After a long time, he called me. Hearing his voice gave me hope. He didn't immediately hang up. He didn't blow up like my mom. He didn't block me. We talked for a while. He told me he didn't recognize the man in the video. But he did tell me something about Miles, apparently. After being placed with a foster family, Miles ran away. He was never found. That was all Trevor knew. I asked for the name of the foster home. He gave it to me. I thanked him and hung up, my mind racing. The next day, I called the foster home. I was on hold for a long time, and instead of normal hold music, I heard Reelin' in the Years playing through the phone speaker. That single detail made my stomach drop harder than anything else had. I didn't tell myself it was coincidence. I couldn't. It felt like a hand on the back of my neck. Eventually, an elderly social worker came on the line. She sounded tired, like she'd been doing this too long. She barely remembered the case, but after some searching, she said she found an old partial entry. Not a full file, just a photocopy of 2 handwritten notes. She offered to type them up and email them to me. Later that day, the email arrived. The first note said, 12/04/2002, follow-up call to foster home. Mrs. Peterson states Miles has been quiet, no trouble. Says he spends a lot of time alone in his room. Claims he has an imaginary friend he talks to. Scheduled home visit next week. The second note was dated a month later, written by someone else. Case file update. Foster family reports Miles ran away. No belongings taken. No signs of struggle. Police report filed. Case status inactive. I stared at those lines for a long time. Imaginary friend. Quiet, alone, then gone, without taking anything, without a struggle. It felt like Miles had been pulled out of the world the same way that man had been pulled out of Annette's photos, like something had decided he didn't belong in the record anymore. I still didn't understand what any of it meant, but I knew Miles mattered. And somehow, I'd ended up holding the thread that connected him to my family, to Annette, and to that man in the doorway with the bees. The next day, I watched the VH tape again, desperate to catch some detail I'd missed. The tape had changed. The man wasn't in it anymore. The picnic looked normal. Miles was playing with the other kids, smiling. Nothing strange happened when the camera panned away and back. The gap where the man had been was filled by air, but it didn't look like a missing piece. It looked like he had never been there in the first place. I rewound it. I watched again. Same thing. I sat there, feeling my pulse in my eyes. It was like the more I tried to understand, the more reality corrected itself, smoothing over the evidence, like the world had an immune system, and my curiosity was an infection it was trying to kill. I called my family again, frantic, telling them the tape had changed, begging them to remember. Now they denied not just the man, but Mr. Carter and Miles, too. They acted like those names meant nothing. Even Uncle Trevor. When I argued with him, desperate and angry, he sounded genuinely confused. "How can you not remember him?" I shouted. "He was best man at your wedding." He denied it. Calmly, like I was making things up. He said my father was his best man. He even sent me wedding pictures afterward. And there, in the photos, was my dad at the front of the crowd making a speech. I stared at those pictures until my eyes hurt. I couldn't even hold on to my own memories anymore. It felt like the ground under my past was sliding away. I gave up. I returned Annette's photo album to my mom and told myself I had to stop. Whatever this was, it didn't want to be seen. It didn't want to be spoken about. And I was starting to feel like if I pushed any harder, it would erase more than photos. it would erase people. I tried to go back to normal life. I told myself I'd drop it, bury it, forget it. Then the next morning, I walked downstairs and saw a Polaroid photo sitting on my kitchen table. I live alone. My doors were locked. No windows were open. I hadn't had anyone over. The Polaroid showed a teenage boy sitting on a wooden floor. He wasn't bleeding. He didn't look physically hurt. But his face was so miserable that just looking at it made my chest ache. He looked like someone who'd been waiting too long for something that wasn't coming. Next to the Polaroid was a jar of honey. I searched my house for signs of a break-in. Nothing. No damage. No missing items. Except the Veitch's tape was gone. I stood there staring at the honey jar, and my mind dragged me back to that day at the strange house, to the bees, to the man's cold knuckles tapping my forehead like I was a door he wanted to open. "You won't tell anybody what you saw," he'd said. Maybe it hadn't been a childhood threat. Maybe it had been a rule. Maybe it was still active, still enforced, even now. So I'm stopping. I'm letting it go, at least on the surface. I'm going to go back to my job, back to my routines, back to pretending the past is solid and real. I don't know why I'm the only one who seems to notice. I don't know what makes me different. I don't know why Annette kept those things, or why the album was labeled family like it was a warning or a joke. I just know that the more I think about it, the more it presses on me. The more I try to remember, the more slippery everything becomes. I needed to write it down somewhere, where it can't be quietly corrected. Somewhere it can sit unchanged, even if everyone around me forgets. If you believe me, thank you. If you don't, I get it. But at least it's here now. In words, in a place where an empty space can't pretend it was never empty.